Hello, and welcome to the final day of the Xena PTG for Cinder. Just a reminder, we're going long today, so we'll be meeting about the secure RBAC effort at 1600 at the end of the day. I checked, I don't think there are any conflicts, so I'll send something in the mailing list. I think we should go ahead and have the Festival of MyPy reviews next Friday at the usual time. I think because of the way the dates of April fell this year, we'll still have 3 weeks before the next regularly scheduled Festival of Reviews. So it's not like we'll be jamming in these meetings and getting overworked. So I'll go ahead, I'll send that out, unless anybody has like a serious conflict and we need to move it. So let me know if that's the case. Just want to give a quick update on the C group V1 to V2 thing. So I went and looked. We use some tools that connect up with, I think it's called libc, probably libc group. So that thing was hosted on SourceForge, but has moved to GitHub. But it's kind of weird. But Fedora, so their latest release is from February last year, and it does not include. They've merged changes to make it compatible with V2, but they haven't been released yet. And they also added a whole lot of testing to it, which is nice. But anyway, so I'll have to revisit that at, what am I trying to say, the mid-cycle. So I won't do anything, because if they do a release, we just have like a 4-character change, and we're golden on this, which would be nice. Otherwise, we'll have to do something else. But Fedora released, so the last release from SourceForge was 0.41, and there was a release from GitHub of 0.42, and my version of Fedora at least does have 0.42. So it does. It's just weird when you go look at the documentation and stuff. It's not obvious that it's a legitimate code repository or what's going on there. So anyway, we'll do that later. And then I did post the team picture, so if you want to take a look, if anyone has radical objections, we can try a new one. Although the meatpad experience yesterday was just horrible. Except with Rajat, I was having trouble hearing you all day because of a bad connection. And it was like you were in the same room with me in meatpad. So, but I couldn't hear anybody else except Erno. So I guess it's the way it goes. I had to, if you look carefully at that photo, I did have to do a minor edit in the bottom row, because one of those pictures didn't have, it was Alan, Rajat, and Eric. Luckily, we're all lined up in the right place, but they weren't in the good photo with everybody. So all 3 photos had somebody missing. So I think I got one that everybody who had exposed themselves in meatpad were visible. So that'll be our team photo for Xena. All right, I guess I've spent too much time on that. Okay, are there any comments or second thoughts from yesterday's discussion? I did want to give a chance for, we never got to the drivers open discussion because the day went kind of long. So I did want to give a chance for that. And actually, I'll have a question. It's actually Chuck's question was, right, they've contributed a new driver in the last cycle. And so, of course, they want to add some more features. So he was wondering what's a good way to decide which features to start adding. So I was wondering if any of the other driver maintainers had a, opinion on that. We got a really small crowd this morning, I guess because it's Friday. All right, so anyway, if anybody has some thoughts or advice for Chuck, because I guess replication is a big one, but you all do that like right out of the box without, right? You're always replicating things all the time is the whole point. Um, so you really don't have to worry about data resiliency. But anyway, if anyone has advice for Chuck, feel free to reach out to him.
I mean, uh, is there some market research where the most commonly used functions are kind of tracked? Has anyone done, like who's using, I don't know, volume migration versus um, volume attach, that kind of stuff? Does anyone know of research like that?
You might want to talk to Arcady because I think he probably pays attention to that kind of stuff. Arcady at Dell. He
Okay.
was here on Tuesday, I think, for the interop working group. Um,
Right. Okay.
so you could ping him. He might have some ideas. Um, yeah, I don't. I should know something, but I don't. We're
Okay.
just always trying to make sure our stuff works that we've got.
This is Arkady Konevsky.
Yes.
Okay. Cool. All right. Thanks.
Oh, I guess one other thing I should ask. The foundation will send out a survey to like each of the PTLs asking how this event went. So if you have any feedback, let me know. I mean, my feedback is right, the virtual format sucks, basically, and I'm just sick of it. And I think it's because, I mean, the connection problems we had yesterday were bad. Um, but it's just also, I mean, we tried that experiment with the happy hour to move it earlier so that people could get to know each other and we could have more camaraderie at the PTG. But I can't see everybody. I don't know if there's somebody there who wants to say something but isn't quite willing to interrupt. And it's just, you know, it's the usual suspects doing all the talking. So it's like in the old days when, you know, you go to one of these Nova sessions and there'd be the circle of like 18 people and then the rest of the room and nobody else could you know, get a question or a comment in. Um, so anyway, but if you have other thoughts, feel free to put them in the Etherpad and I'll convey them. Um,
I would just say to continue to remind them that this is not a 100% drop-in replacement for going to a PTG in person.
yeah, let me add. I lost my Etherpad. Yeah, that's a good point because it's easy because I'm sure it's a nightmare to schedule all this stuff for you know in physical space. But yeah, um, oops.
So, Brian, my name is Jake. I'm a product owner for the NetApp side.
Okay,
And this is my first time attending, and some of the stuff is definitely in the weeds for me. I'm trying to follow as best I can on the tech side. And some stuff I'm certainly following, but I guess for me, what I'm trying to narrow in on is what are the motivations behind the features? What are the thought process that leads through how things are prioritized? From what we're seeing on the business side, we're seeing a gravitation towards telcos and certain types of architectures that are driving the adoption. And I was wondering if those things, how they would be reflected in these meetings and how things would be prioritized. And I don't know that I'm able to connect the dots between the business drivers or the use case drivers, the demographics that are driving adoption, and the feature conversations that we're having. I'm not able to connect those two sort of Venn diagrams of things, right? And and so obviously I'm going to remain quiet as I let everybody do their work, but that's what I'm trying to process. So how are these motivations coming to pass and shaping the future of development through the community? Just as a perspective as to why I'm so quiet through this. Anyway.
No, that's a good point because it's I've actually posted. I don't know if you saw them at the top of the Etherpad. I posted priorities for this cycle. So I sort of have in mind what we need to do, which is mostly technical debt. Gosh, where are they? So up, yes, so around line 40. Um, So these are major stability issues. So from my perspective, I'll say this out loud. So from my perspective, Cinder is fairly feature complete. Well, actually nothing is, but it seems to have a decent set of features, right? It's just they don't all work as well as they should. And some of the features that we have never actually been deployed, configured, and tested. And so that's bad. So we want to improve testing, but we also have various stability things we need to address just overall. So one thing is this secure RBAC thing is going to suck up a bunch of time. But we need to do it because all the other projects are doing it. And if we don't, then it'll make it impossible to get this stuff configured correctly. So that's a rough idea of just right now. So right now, I tend to prioritize stability and getting rid of technical debt, like removing the V2 API, that kind of thing. Now, as far as like other features that people want, we pretty much rely on people showing up here and proposing, let's do this. And then we'll talk about it and see what happens. So an example would be the healing agent for the Kioxia's driver. So they're proposing a kind of general. The architecture is going to be general, but of course it's they want it because their hardware supports this kind of thing. So they proposed, let's put it together like this, and we discussed it. So it's really the community is sort of the driver for how we will introduce things. And then like from our side, from Red Hat, it's basically if customers are pushing for something, our product managers sort of percolate that to us, and then we start thinking about, all right, how are we going to do this? And then, we try to do it in a sort of a general way, so it's like a community effort that makes sense for other people to use. But as far as like with prioritizing things, so I have a list of things that I think we need to do, but of course nobody works for me. So I suggest these things and I try to make it clear that this makes a lot of sense and is good for the project overall. Right, but individual developers have to, answer to somebody else. So I don't know that actually answers anything.
No, it does. It very much does, and it helps a lot. I guess where I'm coming from, just as another perspective, I'm looking at it where there are new features that are coming into the marketplace all the time. Okay. And if there's a separation between how we orchestrate and manage through OpenStack and these other features that are driving the industry forward, if they have to choose between the two, that's not a position we want to leave people in, right? We want to be able to get the stickiest features we can get through this OpenStack medium so that they can continue to grow in this space and not have that be a decision tree moment. And every vendor, NetApp, Pure, HP, whomever, they have their own agendas of things that they're trying to do, but there is some level of common ground. So I was just trying to see how everybody kind of played together in this space. But it makes complete sense that you need to focus on stability issues and things of that nature. That makes complete sense.
But yeah, so we sort of rely on you to say, hey, this is happening and we need to pay attention to this and at least start thinking about it or plan it out. Or if you're in a position where you can implement stuff, that's good too. And then one other thing, the mid-cycles that we have tend to be focused on like stuff we've discussed here, but it's also a possibility to do something like this and say, here's a feature you need to be aware of. We've got to start thinking about how it's going to be implemented or nobody's going to want to use OpenStack. Because we certainly are worried about that kind of thing. I guess so. Keep an eye on the mailing list for the mid cycles. I mean, it's mostly developers, sort of like here, but it is possible, for anyone to attend. And so, if you're paying attention, this is sort of like Chuck's question, right? If you're paying attention to market trends and what people want, and it's looking like, right, from my list of priorities, we're not going to be delivering that in Xena. We need to start thinking about it. So that would be a great way to get involved.
But one thing I would like to point out is the fact that many of us are not vendors, so our knowledge of the new features come from reading articles, going to conferences. We don't have hands-on knowledge on the features. So a lot of the features in Cinder have been actually brought up by vendors through their engineers, because even if I read about a new fancy feature in a storage array, if I don't have access to it, I cannot do much. I can help a developer, but I don't have access, so I cannot test it.
Mm-hmm. No, and my question was not designed as a complaint. I was just trying to see the way the sausage gets made. But I do think it might be interesting in future PTGs to have half an hour where you actually talk the business level of what's happening within the space. And one point of interest would be, how are we doing on metrics and demographic gathering? Do we know what the ecosystem looks like in terms of what features people are using? What size footprints are they attached to? Where's their global presence? Do we have a sense of what that looks like across the community that we could all leverage in terms of how we're thinking about supporting this space? Things like those conversations as its own little 20, 30-minute conversation in a future PTG, just for food for thought. Now,
no, that's a great idea. We weren't taking it as a complaint. Well, I guess, no, what I'm taking it as was like a kick in my butt because, right, I haven't been thinking about this. But this is part of having the separation of the PTG and the summit. I think this is one of the downfalls is that, right, there are no vendors around really. And that's where the kind of thing where people are saying, hey, we need to do this, and we're missing out on that. So I think it's a good suggestion that we need to make room for that kind of thing because nobody else is. At the regular summit, there are these forum sessions where we're supposed to get like interaction between the developers and consumers. So it's sort of like that, but I think what you're proposing is, I think it's important. And if you were willing to put together like a half-hour thing,
careful what you ask for.
Yeah, so be ready for. So I'll what comes after X. So for the Y cycle.
Brian, didn't we used to have the OpenStack organization? Didn't used to have this? They send some kind of form to operators that gathered the information, and they came up with statistic graphs and everything about, for example, in the deployments, how many of the deployments had Nova, Cinder, Swift, the different components, the size of the deployments, and they used to have that. I haven't looked for it in a while.
They still do it. It's the user survey, and each team can propose a question, but we've never had much success getting useful information from that. But I think it's like analytics.openstack.org maybe. Is where the user survey is, or probably if you just search for OpenStack user survey. They just posted the 2020 results like last week.
And Jake, I would help you with that.
But I think this is a good idea.
Who volunteered to help me? Who was it?
Chuck.
Oh, okay.
Okay, Chuck. All right, good. So the other thing, so we could make room for this at one of the mid cycles. It's also possible to just have like a special purpose video meeting. We do the weekly Cinder meetings. We have one video meeting, the last meeting of each month, which is next week actually. So that would be another possibility if you wanted to do something, sort of not waiting. There's this thing, if you have to wait till, the PTG is almost too late because we're talking about what we're going to implement. And if we're just finding out, right? So anyway, so there are a lot of possibilities, and we're open to that. And like Orca said, we don't have access to like vendors' information or market research or anything. So, but we're all curious about this stuff because we're working in this space. So that would be great. We'd be very interested.
Yeah, I'll take my comments off the air. I'm a first-time caller, so it's That's fine. It's all good. Thanks for giving that some daylight, and please continue, and I'll follow up offline.
I have one question, Jake, if you don't mind. You may, when you were saying the difference between the features that are being driven in OpenStack or not driven, and features in other spaces, did you have any in particular that you were thinking about, like so we can evaluate it?
So there's a number of features that, without getting into specifics, that may not be universal. But if you take our overall product family that NetApp has, and we're looking at wanting those to be implemented in, let me give you a different one. We've been running into some issues where people are trying to instantiate a bunch of volumes or LUNs off the bat, and they're running into placement issues, sort of the scheduler not being able to really identify which is the best location to put everything for performance reasons. And we're looking at it going, all right, how are we going to get this fixed? Is this something that we do a workaround using one of our feature set that's in ONTAP that we bring in that's unique, or do we try to bring that to the community where the community solves it? So if we fix the scheduler through the community, that helps, that raises all tides, and that's not a differentiator for us, NetApp. But if we solve it with a different NetApp feature that we bring into the community, maybe that does, but now I'm spending cycles on something that I might not otherwise have spent cycles on. So that's sort of one way to look at it. Another way to look at it is if we're not doing the work of understanding the workflows of how they're using OpenStack today, because I'm having conversations with other business leaders within NetApp and at companies where they're saying, I don't know if I can do everything I'm doing in OpenStack today with a smattering of Ansible and some Kubernetes and some of this and some of that. Maybe that solves all of my OpenStack issues, and I don't need to do that at all. And so I think we need to be thinking about how do we make sure that the ecosystem for OpenStack, where an investment already exists, isn't being threatened by some of these other workflows and use cases that are happening outside when they're talking at the orchestration level. And that's much more complicated. And I'm not, the official answer man for those things, but I'm a part of those conversations, and I'm going, yeah, gosh, I don't know. Where does that conversation even take place? And I don't know where it takes place.
I tend to agree with you, actually, Jake. We see exactly the same in Pure. I would love that sort of information and feedback to be able to present it to our senior management.
Yeah. And maybe you're having this conversation internally too, where I don't have the data in my hands to say, this is how big the OpenStack market is. This is how they're using it. This is why it's really sticky. I don't have that. So every time I come back and need to evangelize spending money to keep investing in OpenStack, I'm tap dancing, and I'm not a good dancer. So, that stuff would be helpful. And that's why I think the community can kind of help each other out in that sense.
Yeah, I agree. That's a great ask. I would love that same sort of information. I'm doing that same tap dance you are all the time.
Yeah. So, again, I've hijacked a good percentage of your day here, but just topics that might make sense for another forum. I don't know where that forum is, but it's food for thought.
No, this is exactly why we're here, is to foster these sorts of discussions. My idea, kind of directing this at you, Brian, we've had good luck recently in sort of spinning up ad hoc sessions that are a little outside of our typical weekly workflow. Thinking of the Festival of Small Reviews type of thing. So I guess I'd encourage anybody in the community to, bring an idea to the table, and if we have to have hey, let's meet next Thursday, out of our regular cycle of meetings, I suspect there'll be a lot of people interested in that.
Yeah, that's a good idea. And then the other thing is the monthly video meeting, because I imagine this kind of thing you'd have slides and stuff, because
Yep.
we'd expect you to be much fancier than developers typing
Not
stuff
all the
in.
hand waving. This is not doing it. No, not good
Well, we
enough.
got to see your hands. So anyway, so that's a possibility too, is, at the weekly meeting, just when we have the video one, set aside like a half of the meeting to discuss this kind of thing. So we're open. So the main message I want to get to you is we're open to it. and it's
Okay,
a great
cool.
idea, and I want you to do something. So
Okay.
yeah,
So
that's,
note to self: don't open your mouth again. Got it. I'm writing it down. Okay.
but
Yeah,
no, this is good because yeah. So let's see what happens, and
Cool. Thanks.
funny
Thanks.
story.
So along,
I'm having to do what you're doing, Jake, but then I also have to explain, to my management chain in Japan how open source works.
Mm.
And I built a slide set that was talking about sushi and how the Itamae gives you free chopsticks so you can sell the sushi. It was very funny, cultural kind of like, okay, open source, you have to give away the chopsticks, and because they have a real, they don't want to give away anything. It's very funny. Anyway, I'll help with that, Jake.
All right. Awesome.
all right, great.
so along those lines, really quickly, as I'm a Cinder developer, but I'm also a deployer, and we have a very large deployment at SAP that uses NetApp, a lot of NetApps, FYI. So I don't know if that's the kind of feedback you're looking for as well, or whatnot.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Okay, that's great. And then all right, good. Any other general observations? So this was helpful. Okay, all right. Next up is Eric to talk about snapshotting attached volumes. So Eric, you've got the floor.
Sure. All right. So I started a spec for this. There's not a whole lot in there yet, so I wouldn't worry about trying to go read that right now. But this is something I've been intending to go after for many years and just haven't. But basically, the Cinder API, if you want to snapshot an attached volume, requires you to call it with a force flag added. And I would argue that this serves no real purpose and is kind of just annoying to anyone that actually wants to use snapshots for things that they're useful for. So I think if we kind of look at why this is the case, I think it was a somewhat arbitrary decision really, really early on in Cinder. And I think the reason that this was maybe decided was whoever did this early on didn't really think that crash consistency for snapshots was the sufficient useful target.
It was probably John Griffiths. Blame him for all the early stuff.
So yeah. So the result of this is basically if you want to use snapshots in Cinder for things that are attached, which is, when snapshots are actually useful, because nobody sits around making a bunch of snapshots for volumes that aren't attached to things anyway. You have to pass a force flag, and it's just kind of an odd thing because as far as I know, any typical virtualization or cloud system assumes that crash consistency is sufficient and doesn't make you pass a flag that says I'm okay with doing this and getting a crash consistent snapshot, because I think that's really what people expect as a baseline. The result of this is that if you look around at everybody that uses Cinder, anybody that's using it manually from Cinder client or OpenStack client has to pass a force flag by hand to create snapshots. Nova creates Cinder snapshots when you do an instance snapshot, and it calls it with the force flag because it has to for it to be useful. CSI and Kubernetes also calls the snapshot API with the force flag because it has to for it to be useful. And so, whatever theory led to we should make this a flag that people have to opt into doesn't really achieve anything because the result is everyone ends up passing this flag everywhere because you have to. And then the question is, why do we have the flag for this in the first place?
Well, Eric, I kind of disagree there on the reason why it was added. Like, I understand the reason. If you have if the volume is detached, you know that you get exactly a snapshot with what's there, then you have the cross consistency. And what many users will think that they don't get the cross consistency snapshot, but that actually Cinder talks with Nova and you get the QS and then you do the snapshot. So to avoid users that are running the commands manually to suddenly not get what they would expect, we differentiate it. The fact, like you say, people say, okay, whatever, I'm writing my script and I know it's attached, so I just pass force. Does not invalidate the fact that a new user or someone running it will see an error and will have to think about what they are doing and confirm, oh yeah, okay, I'm okay. This is what I can get, and I'll do it this way.
So do any other systems like Cinder behave that way in cloud virtualization platforms in general?
No, you ask for a snapshot, you get a snapshot, whether it's attached or not.
Right.
VMware, look at Amazon, all of that sort of stuff. You get a snapshot when you ask for it. It's up to you to know whether that application is snapshot consistent and whether the underlying storage that you're trying to get to is snapshot consistent on a restore or a recovery.
Yeah.
And do they have a mechanism to get it, the application, to, like your snapshot, to get your application or your system to QS, like to let the system know?
A lot of them do, but they don't require you to set that up for the APIs to work. The normal behavior for most systems I've ever used is that if they have the ability to quiesce with an agent or whatever, they'll try to do it. But if they can't do it, they're still going to create snapshots for you. And
the only thing that could be a potential wrinkle in this is when you're talking about consistency groups. Okay, so if people have got multiple disks that they want a snapshot for a consistent application, they need to go into a consistency group, which is fair. And then we need to look at, do we need the force flag on the consistency group snapshots? Okay, so you've got to go a little bit further on than that. But then there becomes another issue in that what happens if you've got a sort of strange configuration, maybe you're trying to do some sort of DR type solution. Let's think of a sort of database that's got two disks. One's a journal disk, one is a data disk. Okay, and you snapshot both of those for point-in-time recoveries, but you only want to snapshot the main volume and maybe an application disk as well, so you can put it in a DR site for a really cold recovery should you need to do that, because you wouldn't want your journal disks to do that. Okay, that means that the data disk would potentially have to be in two consistency groups, which we don't allow today. So we need to have to think about that. And in fact, I've actually been discussing that with IBM recently, and they've raised a blueprint for that, about having multiple volumes in multiple volume groups.
So that is an interesting scenario. For the purposes of the API change I was proposing, I was not intending to change this for groups at all. But yeah, if you're looking at consistency groups, there are, a lot more pieces involved.
For what it's worth, we have
in the spec. So in the blueprint that IBM have put up. I'll put the link into the Etherpad.
For what it's worth, we have a similar issue in backups. It's basically the same problem. If you have an attached volume, you can't do a backup with it unless you do a force. So it's kind of the same idea. I'm faced with that issue now, dealing with my whole backup issue that I have here. But everybody uses dash force because they want the backup.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And it's
And behind the scenes, what it does is it ends up, at least for VMware, it ends up cloning the whole thing in real time, and then that takes forever. But at the end of the day, it's allowed to go through, and it does work for what that data is worth at that point in time. So I guess I'm kind of on board with Eric in respect that if we're going to get rid of it because people are using it anyway, because they just want it to work and they don't care, then we should probably look at getting rid of the force flag for backups too, because people want to do backups, especially for their volumes that are attached.
yeah, I think that would make sense.
I mean, most applications these days are capable of dealing with crash consistent backups, and most storage these days produces crash consistent backups.
So yeah, to kind of close the loop on what I was getting at, I think it's reasonable to kind of make this change to shift Cinder to match with what the rest of the world is doing. Is part of why I don't think we're gaining a lot by trying to be extra safe around this. Actually, I don't really think we're gaining much of anything personally, but
What we're doing is frustrating people when they try and do a snapshot, realize they can't, and have to redo it again with a force flag.
right.
Especially since there's no real explanation as to why we make them do the force flag when they're actually executing it from the command line, saying, hey, this is not a smart thing to do because of XYZ. We just say, hey, this volume's attached, or, so we don't.
Well, and it makes Cinder look really odd because no other platform yells at you, hey, this is a weird thing to do. Do you really want to do it?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I guess we could enhance the API reference to just have a statement, just about general advice about, or I guess making it clear, right, Gorka's point that people might expect that things are being quiesced first, and we should just say, right, you'll get a crash consistent snapshot, right? So if you don't want that, then you'll have to do stuff yourself.
I don't think anyone expects storage to quiesce data. They expect the application to do that, so they'll build that into their workflow.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So if I remember correctly, if you set up Nova right, you can drive a snapshot from the Nova side that is quiesced, right?
Yep.
So I guess people that care about this do that. Many years ago, I had a proposal for Cinder to drive quiesced snapshots through Nova. But I think the reason that we don't have people beating on the Cinder door asking for that is because everybody that wants it just does it through Nova instead of trying to do it through Cinder.
I think if we remove the force, beside updating the documentation and saying that this is a cross consistent and the release notes and whatever, we should also point to Nova. Like, if you want this other kind of snapshot, please go over there or do this other thing or whatever.
Yeah, I think that's one of those things that I think a lot of people know how to do, but I don't think it's actually very obviously documented. It's documented somewhere, but I don't know if I would even know how to find it real quick. And it would also be worth maybe kind of, from the documentation point of view, just pointing out all the places that are doing snapshots in Cinder and the fact that they're all crash consistent, because it's, this comes up in backup, it comes up in uploading a volume to an image, and a few places like that. So if we think the general idea makes sense, I can hash out a lot more of these details in the spec. But the most I think most of this work code-wise is going to be a new API micro version that just changes the status check call. I don't think from the code point of view there's going to be a whole lot else happening with this.
To tell you the truth, even if I am complaining about the removal, I don't even think that we really need a spec for this. I think the justification you've given it here, I think we all kind of agree. Well, you all kind of agree in removing it. So, like you say, this is not like a big code change, or we are not going to break anybody's script because this is a new micro version. So I'm okay with you not even doing the spec. I don't know about the rest.
Yeah, I think our general policy is anything touching the API.
Well, I already started one, and it's not a lot of work to make one that just explains what's going on.
Yeah, it doesn't have to have a lot of stuff in there. But yeah, if you like get a prototype of the documentation in there, I mean, just sort of explaining why, then it'll make it really easy to do that change. So I think that's good.
Yeah, sounds good. So I don't think I have much else on this unless anybody wants to discuss anything in particular.
So are you going to include backups also?
I got to go look at backups.
Okay.
I don't know if there are broader, performance concerns or something involved. I got to go look again at how that actually works when you do it for backups.
Okay.
I'll definitely look at it.
Okay.
I think it makes a lot of sense for backups, but I'm not sure if it's as trivial of a change or not, because I don't know what kind of implications it has for how the drivers work and whatever.
For backups, it has a big one, which is I think one of Walter's complaints about one of the topics he has added, which is basically in most drivers we do a cloning instead of a snapshot. So there are drivers that cloning is really slow, and some drivers that are even slower because they actually do a DD of the volume. So that is definitely a case where you want to be sure that they know it's going to take forever.
Right.
Something like that.
But if the current situation is that everybody is doing that anyway, it's more about documenting it, and I haven't looked enough in that area to know what all is going on there, but yeah.
And for what it's worth, the patch that I have to talk about later solves a major problem with respect to those long actions of cloning the volume for the backup process.
Right.
Okay, great. Any other comments? Okay. Thanks, Eric. Let's move on to Fernando with he's got a very detailed summary in the Etherpad.
Okay, just a sec. Let me find the topic here. Yeah, okay. So basically, I will talk a bit about like something that that issue that Jake said in the beginning of the call regarding like a scheduler instances not like evenly balancing volumes among pools. So yeah, investigating one particular customer concern, we identified that like it's a looks like it's a pretty no issue, but I wasn't totally aware of that. But the scheduler instances will always relies on an internal state to keep track of capacity information. So when you create or manage, delete volumes, you are going to have like each of the scheduler instances trying to keep track of until it get a refresh or from the volume side. It's going to it will always try to keep internal state of which pools are getting are like a losing size or like a is are going to be like are going to have less space. So this is a problem when you have like multiple scheduler instances running in active. If you have, for example, 5 controllers, that would be a situation that I think is not like it's really common. And basically you are going to have 5 instances with a single with the same not sharing a state, but with their currently internal state. So they all see a pool with the same sizing. If one pool gets if one scheduler identifies elects a pool for creating a volume, that updating the shared state is not going to reflect to the others. So the next scheduler is going to receive a new volume. It's not going to understand to know that another scheduler already increased decrease the free space, and is going to try to create the same another volume in the same pool. So yeah, we have like states running on the volume side, also on the scheduler side. They are not talking to each other, and basically that looks like a problem to me. I don't know, looks like it's a no issue. We have seen, I have seen it on documentation on on docs from several releases. So I guess that might be something that was discussed in the past, and basically I have some questions to do today. If how customers are dealing with it, if they have some workaround to try to mitigate that problem in any way. Firstly, let me understand if I explained it correctly, the issue, if you all got it, if I need to provide more details or be more, try to explain another way.
From what I understand, when you have your explanation is the issue is syncing and making the most relevant and up-to-date volume stats or pools utilization information available across all of the deployed schedulers for active-active. Is that correct?
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. So in our deployment, we have a very large deployment across multiple regions, and we use multiple API instances, but only one scheduler instance. So we don't deploy active-active schedulers. We deploy kind of a semi-active API to support a couple backends that we have deployed. But I think one workaround that I would look at, which doesn't really involve changing the scheduler and fixing this problem really, is to use one of the randomized filters or weighers to overcome this a little bit.
Yeah, I think this is a problem that NetApp has been, not facing, that their customers have been complaining about for a long time, because there is a weighter, like Walter was suggesting, that was added by Ben in 2016
Okay.
that it's the stochastic way. And the reason was to try to minimize the impact of this scheduler problem by not returning by not always returning the best that specific scheduler, the best host. Yeah, I think that is that was Ben's approach as a workaround for the current limitation.
Yeah, that's nice. I've seen that particular feed filter looks like a possible workaround. But like as I don't know, I don't have all the history involved, so basically I was thinking like maybe I'm trying to provide a workaround just being lazy or something. So I would really like to know if yeah, and you just
With current code, that could be the workaround, one of those. Either basically what Walter said, one of those two, you limit to one scheduler, that. Any other thing probably requires fixing, which is part of what you added in your notes there. Yes,
yeah, exactly.
how we can
Yeah.
fix it.
There's also one more workaround, which is less nice, but would probably work as well. Each of the drivers has the ability to provide a goodness function, and that is also called during the scheduling time, provisioning time, to allow the driver to give a goodness weight with respect to whether the provisioning request should land upon that particular driver's instance. It would require some coding on the deployer side to adjust that and add that capability to track how many of the last requests that have come in, have landed on this particular pool. And if, we've gotten 10 in the last X amount of seconds, then reduce that weight. I mean, that's not a fix, but it's a potential workaround that might help mitigate this a little bit. It's definitely not a fix, but that's also another mechanism.
Another alternative, depending on the backend, is if the stats gathering is not expensive on the backend, you can increase the frequency that information is sent to the schedulers, thus reducing the window where the schedulers are out of sync. Again, not a fix, but
Yeah,
if I remember correctly, aren't there a couple actions that happen on the back end that sometimes instantly call a request to get the volume stats again immediately? For some reason, I thought that happened on certain API calls into the driver. That the manager.
I don't think they do. I don't think they do.
Maybe I'm
Well, wait. I think that the schedulers can request, when they wake up, they can request the volume service to send that information if they don't have it.
Yeah.
But other than that, I don't think we have any other operation that forces the stats gathering.
Customer is currently using the allocated capacity, not the provisioned capacity. There's also a problem that the NetApp drivers, all of them doesn't provide a provisioned capacity, so we doesn't we don't go to the storage to know the currently allocated the current capacity available. So yeah. So what happens is that the driver will always rely on the manager calculation. The volume manager will try to calculate it in the same way the scheduler does. So in the end, the volumes when they try to sync with the scheduler, they are also passing the wrong information, because since the when volume start, it goes to the Cinder database and accumulate all volume sizes and save that as its current located capacity. And during every capacity report is going to just like when you get a volume create, the manager will increase or decrease that, and report just that internal state to the scheduler. So when you have that, you have basically a situation that the scheduler is trying to maintain the internal state. You have the volume manager that is not also relying on the storage to get the free space. It's also have its own internal state. So suppose there are situations that a volume that didn't receive or didn't get a volume request will update a scheduler that saw a event of creation. So like a scheduler increase its value, then it's increase the capacity value, then receives a scheduler capacity report, volume scheduler report saying that like the actually free space is greater because it didn't process the create operation. So at least on the driver side, we know that the provision capacity is not available anymore. For example, I took a look at the RBD side. There is a possibility of enabling the provisioned capacity is going to go to the storage. It goes to the storage to get the free space and return it from a storage perspective. So provisioned capacity would help in that way, but NetApp doesn't have that. We would probably need to implement something like that. I'm not sure if it would be another workaround approach to instead of like having volumes reporting their their manager internal state, report the provisioned capacity based on last storage information. If you have, for example, 5 volumes running asynchronous, running concurrently in the same, like you have 5 controllers running also 5 volumes, you would have like at least 5 volumes trying to update that, to update the schedulers with the most, with some information from the storage. Not sure.
Well, there are many topics that you brought there.
Yeah.
So it's,
Sorry.
No, it's okay. I will try to answer some of them.
Yeah.
So there are 2 factors that you have kind of joined together, which are, one is the first topic we brought up, which is we have 5 schedulers or 3 or whatever, and they internally have different information, which basically is our schedulers will not do the same thing. If we send the same request to different volumes at the same time, depending which one receives it, it will give me a different result because their internal information is out of sync. That is one issue. The next issue, which you kind of mix together, is when the driver does not report the provision, does not bother going to the storage and relies on Cinder Manager counting the volumes that have been provisioned. This is not such a big deal in terms that the information that is reported will be synchronous. It will be the same in all the schedulers.
Yeah. Yes.
So at least you will get consistency from the scheduler perspective. You just don't get accuracy in the reported data, which is slightly different, which brings us to the RBD patch that you commented. In the patch in RBD, what did was take into account that RBD has I don't know other backends, but in RBD, if we want to know the real size of each volume, we have to make 1 request per volume. This meant that if you have 50,000 volumes, each time the stats were being gathered, we had to launch like 51,000 requests or 50,000 one. It was too much. So in the end, the service would suddenly appear to be down, things like that. So what we decided is that for most cases, the accuracy provided by the manager is good enough, because what we are actually doing is we are gathering the total. So we don't know how many volumes have been provisioned, but we can tell you how much free space there is. We gather that on each stat request. So the free space, we get it right. And we also get the total space used for all the volumes as a single, because that information you can retrieve with our request. You can say, give me your stats on this pool, and you get the free and the used. So the allocated and the free you get. And that is what the flag to enable and disable those 50,000 requests is called exclusive pool, Cinder exclusive pool or something like that. Because if you are only using Cinder, that pool is only being used by Cinder. Counting and adding all the different volume actual sizes will result in the same result, in the same value as saying how much is allocated for the whole pool. So you get the same value. You just don't have to make all the requests. This value is only different if you have two different services or two different deployments or anything using the same pool. That is where the amount that is actually allocated by Cinder will be different than the totally allocated in the pool. So I don't know if in NetApp it's possible to just gather that information.
Except the allocated
Hi guys.
Allocated space is initialized at host startup time and only takes into account volumes that are either attached or available. So anything else that's been allocated, say you try and extend the volume and it gets in an error state. Well, allocated space doesn't take into account the original size of the volume in that case. So there's some holes in that initial calculation that I think is what you mentioned earlier, which is a problem. It's not totally accurate.
But that's the provision value, right? Not the allocated, because allocated we then make them equal if we don't get the value. But
correct. Yes, it's the allocated space. I've actually run into this bouncing my pods, my Kubernetes pods that show how much is allocated. They can change every time I restart it because of the states of volumes going in and out of error state or whatnot at the time that it's actually started. And I ran into this. It's not a huge deal, but whatever.
But it's a bug. If we get the wrong data by the manager, because we are filtering out some volumes, then that is a bug. Definitely.
Yes, it is. Yeah. Yep.
And it should be easy to fix that one. It's just don't filter this out. Yeah. Okay. So that is the bug.
Okay. Yeah. So my main question is already like you just answered me. That's basically some workarounds for that problem. Thank you very much on that. Now considering we would maybe fix that in some way. I don't know if we had discussions in the past how we could do that, like maybe with a database table to like keep track of like pool stats, or maybe like there is another option in the HA guide that would be using the replacement library or something like that. So yeah, would like to hear your thoughts on the possibilities.
Oh, hi. Do you hear me?
Yep.
Hi. It's Ivan. I'm sorry. I can't open video again. Unfortunately, I got this issue with talked about it a few times in the past, and this issue is not common. It means not everybody faced it, but time to time somebody faces this issue, and we should be fair with everybody. We don't support active HA. We don't support even good HA for Cinder scheduler now. We discussed it in the past, and I started working on spec to move Cinder scheduler data into the database. I put this spec into the ether part, you can see. So, according to this spec, I've got few concerns about implementation proposed, and before I raised this topic, there was some concern about performance, because Cinder scheduler is fast enough comparing to Nova. Nova uses the database, you may know, and it has not this issue. But from Cinder perspective, we don't have really big amount of data for scheduler, so performance should not be a real issue.
Okay.
From my point of view, the only one way to fix such issues is to have some common storage for all schedulers. It could be database, it could be some in-memory storage, but it should be one storage. Or in other case, we have to implement some distributed locking with some distributed.
And this would significantly decrease schedulers' performance, which we know that schedulers are pretty fast in Cinder. Maybe the customer shouldn't be using like active for the scheduler at all, but they have a system like a running Myrantis, a pre-old Myrantis version. They have been using that for a long time. So I'm not sure if, like, for example, Myrantis have the active enabled by default, but their system is fully active. All their volumes are running active in their schedulers and APIs as well, in running like pretty old versions of OpenStack, so of Cinder and OpenStack. Yeah, basically what I would like if someone could guide me. Maybe we could do this offline, but considering maybe writing a spec or helping me writing a spec on that. So like maybe we could work on a fix on the next releases. And I'm going to bring those workarounds to discuss if they are valid for this specific customer. But maybe it would be valid to like at least propose a fix for that. Maybe I would like to at least like trying to help design something. Or
So Cinder already has a rudimentary amount of usage of memcached and Redis if need be, if they're available. And we have twos that's available for synchronization. I could imagine using a layered approach of the database being the fallback for the shared data segment, right? Which is really what we're talking about is shared memory and how to manage that across multiple processes. And this happens to be across multiple machines. So, you know, it would make a lot of sense to look at using a shared lock for accessing, writing, and reading the semaphore data, basically, and then having Cinder having a layered approach to supporting either using the database, which I think is not the greatest, especially for this transient data that we're going to have a lot of reads and writes to over the course of time, just to stay in sync, or using memcached or Redis to store that.
The problem with the tools library is that it's mostly for leader election logs, things like that. And so it doesn't do actually any memory storing. It doesn't give the user of the library any memory storing capability.
Yeah, twos doesn't, but it gives you the locks necessary to ensure that whoever's writing to that segment has the authority to do so and not overriding somebody else's, right?
Yeah,
Well,
the problem
it gives you an API to the locks, but you have to feed it a backend
Yes.
that supports distributed locks.
Yes, which is either Redis, memcached, or something like that, which if that's available, then that could also be leveraged to actually storing the memory segment that we need to share. I guess that was my point.
Yeah, but my concern, and I think that's what I was bickering about in Ivan's spec, is that if we do the lock-in, then we are basically serializing the scheduler request. And in that case, why do we even need multiple schedulers if we are going to serialize everything? Because besides checking that data, actually the processing of selecting filter is a backend. It's a very fast operation. Most of the time it's just going through that data, which you would need to lock. The lock to actually, so otherwise somebody changing the data when you're reading it.
So yes, you're
Pretty
absolutely
fair
right,
point.
and that's one of the reasons why we have one scheduler for us.
Yeah,
But
so
for others, the other side of the active question is not necessarily for performance, right? It's for redundancy, and in
and
that case, then it's okay to serialize some of those requests, right? It just
well,
depends on what you want from it.
so looks like we don't want, and we actually don't need active for scheduler. We need HA for it, and it's a different thing.
Active passive.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Then maybe we could look into a solution that does leader election using tools, and we just have one answering the RabbitMQ request, and when a new leader comes in, replaces that one and starts doing the request. So
We can have leader election. We can have one shared storage with logs, so on.
Yeah, I think that makes more sense, personally. We get a heck of a lot more API requests than we do scheduler requests.
And we can always, even if we now serialize and change it and it's slower and whatever, we can always in the future come back and say, okay, let's give it another thought and improve the performance. Because at least performance is something that it's easier to explain to anybody complaining than saying, yep, we don't know how to do math, which is what they get when they start trying to figure out why things are not going to the right place. That's the feeling people get. Like the scheduler doesn't know how to do the operations. Yep. So I'm okay with making it having only one service at a time, doing checking a specific information, be it using the database like Ivan proposed, having only one service, leader election, any of the mechanisms.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's it on my side. Um, Need to investigate the like what we have discussed here. So don't know. Anyone would like to provide any more comments? I'm pretty comfort at least with the workarounds. Now I have more options to test and check would be the best one. Also, I guess we are considering a possibility to improve the HA for the scheduler by creating a system to run active passive.
Walter, I have one request to you. Since you're already in the deployment, already have a single scheduler, I was wondering if you could somehow look in the logs or read them or whatever to see the amount of requests you get because you have a big deployment to confirm that, because then in whatever spec we write, we can say, yep, there is no problem. There is really not that big of a deal having a single service doing everything.
Yeah, well, I can say with a level of confidence that we have several regions that have very large deployments and a lot of customers and a lot of requests coming in, and we've never had a problem with the scheduler not being able to service requests because it's too busy. But we also tune the amount of CPU memory available to the scheduler too, because we're using Kubernetes. This is all running on Kates. And we can tune that to a certain extent, right, with the pod declarations and the resources that are declared for it. But that this is exactly why we have 4 or 5 API pods running, one scheduler, and we have 1 or 2 backends that are running for Cinder, depending upon our volume types and whatnot that we have set up. And I've
Those
never seen problems with it.
Those backends aren't running like active as well.
Correct. They're not. They're 2 different volume types. For they're single active, but the APIs are kind of active, and we're running into issues with that, and I'm putting 2s into place to have a shared lock between those for very specific instances that we're running into with respect to something that we've completely changed and how the scheduler works a little bit for our purposes because of VMware and its limitations. But that for Cinder in general, in terms of the schedule's ability to keep up with servicing requests, it has not been a problem for us.
Okay, and have you noticed have you had the need to increase a lot the CPU and RAM requirements for the scheduler, or are they normal?
Not really. They're normal.
Thanks.
Yep.
That's useful information.
Like I said, we get a lot of API requests of people doing dumb stuff. They have scripts that they're fetching thousands of volumes every, very short period of time. They just, and we can't stop them from doing that. But scheduler stuff gets involved when they're actually doing a lot of provisioning, and people don't do that a lot because it costs them money. It doesn't cost them money to do API fetches, but provisioning requests, that costs money. So they don't do that a lot.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay, so Fernando, sounds like you've got what you need.
Yeah.
Okay, and maybe this would be a good topic to revisit at the first mid-cycle. You can report back what you're looking at.
Okay,
Right.
perfect.
Thanks.
Thank you very much for your inputs.
Okay, Walt, you're up next, I believe. Yeah, making the backup process asynchronous.
Oh, okay. So a little bit of background on this. We have backups deployed in the same deployment, and we have customers that have multiple 2 terabyte volumes that are full, and they obviously want to do backups because they're really important. And because of the way our backend, which happens to be VMware, operates, as well as how the process of the Cinder backup calls the Cinder manager to do certain things at certain times, we run into timeouts because, from my understanding of how the backup process works, is for the generic case, when there's a volume attached or unattached, there's an RPC call from the backup manager to the Cinder manager to get a backup device. And if the device is attached, it asks the driver to clone the volume and then return that one to do the backup against. And then once the backup is completed, it gets rid of that temporary clone and then goes on its way. Well, the problem is for some of the backends, ours in example, and evidently Ceph as well, that RPC call is a call and not a cast, so it is a synchronous call and it waits for that to return. And some backups like ours for a 2 terabyte volume, that could take hours for that to clone that volume. And so we've run into cases where obviously that's a problem. So the way I have proposed fixing that is to change that call to a cast, and then once the driver has finished doing the clone, it tells the volume manager, hey, I'm done, and the volume manager does another cast back to the backup manager to continue the backup. I've put this into place in my QA environment. I've been testing it for a couple weeks. I've been running into all kinds of problems that are related to VMware itself. And some of our QA environments is not the same as production. But it does seem to work. And for us, it's the direction that I'm going to go in. And I was hoping to get this approved by everybody else so I can upstream it and not have to manage my own branch yet again for another set of patches. But basically that's the proposal, is to break that problem point, which is the RPC call into the volume manager to make it a cast so it's asynchronous. So who cares how long it takes for whatever backend to clone that volume? It doesn't really matter, because the volume manager would do a cast back to the backup manager to continue the backup. And I put up a work in progress patch, which was just my very first attempt. There's some issues with that. I haven't worked on any of the unit tests for it. I've been actually testing it to try and make sure this stuff works. And I have some more patches to clean some of that stuff up. But the idea in general seems to work. I know that Eric had proposed a workaround with respect to the Oslo messaging, has a keep alive and a timeout with respect to that.
Yeah. So I was trying to find what I thought was an easier way out of this, but
Yeah.
I don't think it's actually. I think you've actually got the right idea on this, and I don't think we want to go the route I was looking at there.
Yeah, unfortunately, if it was just like like an order of magnitude of 10 times the average RPC timeout that it takes to create that backup device, then it probably wouldn't be that big of a deal. But we're talking hours upon hours for us to clone a volume, especially on a loaded system where there's all kinds of other provisioning requests going on. The backups can take up to 10 plus hours, and I think having this asynchronous makes more sense to me. So if nobody objects, should I write up a spec for this? Because all I've done is throw up a work in progress patch that I've been testing. So I don't know if you guys had questions about it or if you wanted me to go through that process or whatnot.
I have, the general idea, I think it's, like Eric said, sounds like the right one. I was just wondering one thing, and it's, does VMware snapshot, can those be attached, the snapshot,
Well,
or
for
not?
VMware, we don't do snapshots. It's a full clone for whatever reason. That's the volume driver itself. So if it was a simple snapshot and VMware had the ability to do a quick snapshot, then that would be an option. But I've actually looked at that for other reasons, and they have a concept of creating a linked snapshot, which I think is supposed to be faster, but it has all kinds of locking problems, especially for attached volumes. And so we don't do that either. VMware is not my favorite. There are so many problems with it, but anyway, that's irrelevant.
Okay.
I've looked at other mechanisms too for trying to fix this.
Yeah. But yeah, it stands to reason, and I know at least another driver that would have the same problem that you have. So this will be helpful for more than one driver.
I think in my experience with writing the 3-part driver too, even typically when they create a clone, they'll do an online clone, but it can only service so many of those. So in that case, after like 2 or 3, I think, are started, it does a full copy and it takes forever. So, that I think that problem would be there for that driver too. And the original bug was written against Ceph, for what it's worth.
Against Ceph.
Yeah,
Oh.
they're trying to do a flatten at the time of doing a backup, and that took too long, and they were seeing the same exact RPC timeouts.
Which brings me to thinking that on RBD, we should not flatten when we are creating a temporary resource. Like we create a temporary volume, we should not flatten it ever because it's going to be short-lived. So it makes no sense to flatten it. Yep, I'll look into fixing that on RBD to improve those cases. Thank you.
Yep. All right, so I'll go ahead with this work in progress, and I have to get it deployed in production for us first, and then I will try work on the most difficult part about this patch, which is getting the unit test working. Because there are a lot of changes with respect to that. I mean, the refactoring was pretty simple. I mean, I did that in an hour, but then I started looking at the unit tests. I'm like, oh. So anyway, that's all I had with this one.
If it helps any, the unit tests might be similar to the one I did recently around calling remove export asynchronously for backups. I think there might be a unit test infrastructure there.
Can you send me the patch that you did for that?
Yeah.
That would help. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Walt. Yeah, I think as far as like the spec or anything, it looks like the patch explains why you're making the change, and it makes sense. So I think it's okay. So when somebody comes across this, they'll know what's going on.
Okay, and it really doesn't affect even the configuration at all, or like that. It's just I don't think this would affect upgrades unless there's an active backup going on. But once you bounce the backup manager, it's going to invalidate that backup anyway. So
I think you will need probably backward compatibility code during one release in case there is a rolling upgrade. So you either run with the baggy code, which is the run backup, or you do the new thing depending on what is the bin version.
Yep. Yeah, there's, I think one of the things that I figured out after I put my work in progress patch up is to enable, there's like, in the current version of the RPC call, there's already two versions in there. One is, I think, put into place a long time ago with respect to the when we migrated everything to objects from dictionaries, and then there's one with a specific version and that allows you to do something smarter. I forget what the actual RPC version number is, but I was going to keep that into place for one version just in case there was a rolling upgrade in place happening, so that way it didn't break anything. So it would try its best to do the synchronous version of the backup for that rolling upgrade, and then after it's upgraded, then the new version would take over because the RPC version will be updated, obviously, for this call.
All right, great. Thanks, Walt. Okay, next up is Rajat with user-facing messages for backups.
Did he just run away? No, he's back.
I think we can
Okay,
hear you.
Rajat. Rajat? Yeah, he left.
He said he was getting muted.
Am I audible now?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, somehow I was getting muted again and again. I'm not sure. So we have this Tinder user-facing messages API since microversion 3.3. So it's been a long time, but we still don't have coverage for like a lot of areas. So we have the coverage for volumes and snapshots, and for backups, I'm planning to implement these. Like the general idea of user-facing messages, whenever we have an asynchronous operation, so the API returns a 202 like accepted code, and if the operation fails on scheduler or the volume side or the backup service, then we can query it from the messages API. So I have put together a patch which generally places some messages around some operations. So on backup side, I have noted that there is a create, delete, and restore operation, which are asynchronous, and the backup operation goes through scheduler. So there's one message there, and three on the backup manager side when they form the operation on the driver or the chunk driver, whichever does it. So I have placed user messages in these four areas, and I wasn't sure like if we need more or like I haven't worked on this area before. So I just wanted suggestion is there any other place which requires these messages or an improvement on this?
Yeah, in general, it's good to have user messages for all kinds of resources we've got, like snapshots, volumes, backups, so on. But backups are a pretty different situation because we've got backup error message field in the database, and we store exception message in the database. it's available for admin only, I guess. But having a data duplication only just to show it for users, I don't think it's a good idea. Probably we have to revisit this and delete error information from the database and leave everything in messages and just drop sensitive information so all users can see it.
I don't completely understand. So, are you saying that we already have the error information stored in database for backup?
Yes, we've got error messages in the backup error messages in the database.
Yeah, but that doesn't provide the same functionality that the messages API does, because users need to be able to see it and not admin. If it's provided via the messages API, you also get the stuff where you can query by the request ID of the request you made and search on the backup ID and that kind of thing. I think there's still value in using the user messages API to provide this info.
But one thing I would like to point out is that I think we are kind of, the action that we are writing, to me, it seems like we are adding redundant information by the action itself. For example, we have a user message for create a snapshot, create backup, create volume, I think, maybe. And basically, it's a create resource of the action. And we are already storing the resource in a different field. So if you combine everything, it's a create and the resource, whatever it is. So, but we keep adding new actions. It's just a minor nit that I think it's a bit weird that we need a new action for the different create operations. And I don't know if we should try to kind of group them together, or not that we can do it for the ones that we already have, but try to create more generic actions.
So,
Yeah, I
so this
think
patch
that
looks like it's just sending user messages for the failures. Is your plan to add them in more places other than just some failures in the backup?
like I'm not sure. Like user messages, like I haven't worked in this area before, so I thought it's just for errors, exceptions only.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, in general, we only use them for user errors. But I think, yeah, we only do.
Backup is one of those special cases that I think it might be useful for something other than an error message, such as providing progress.
But in theory, we do have a field to show progress, right? In the database, if I remember correctly. I don't know if we are using it or if we just jump from 0 to 100%, but I think we do have a field.
Yeah, there is in the Swift driver, I think there is a call to get update progress. Well, I'm calling it an Oslo VMware, which is what's doing the actual data reading and writing. But in there, one of the problems, this is totally orthogonal to this, to your topic. So we can bring this up later. But the progress information is totally, utterly inaccurate.
Oh, then it's back in the probably in the send, like you say, send progress notification is probably not.
There's actually a patch up, I think, fixing that for some backup backend right now, because somebody else found that same thing, and I I don't remember which backend they're fixing it for, but I think there's a patch out for one of them.
Okay. We can talk about this after we're done with Rajat's topic. I'm sorry to switch topics on you, but it was related to backup.
I think, Rajat, even if you forget some operation, I could not download your patch because there were missing messages, because any new message that we get in will make our customer, the end users happy and will add value. So it's not like missing something, it's going to create some weirdness in the users. And I think those are probably the ones you added are probably the biggest ones. The problems creating, scheduling, deleting, and restoring, yeah.
Yeah, I think this is a good idea. I think for the longest time, backup has been a bastard child of Cinder that everybody just doesn't want to deal with or talk about, but it.
Okay, yeah. I think like if there are any more places I have missed, anyone can provide input on the review, and I will go ahead with writing tests for these. And yeah, thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, I'm not sure who put the next item on. Volume list query by error state to contain error managing state. This may actually be a request for a review.
I think this was a discussion,
Yeah, we could.
session a while back. I don't remember exactly where we landed on it, but I distinctly remember I objected to it, and then I think I eventually figured out that I was wrong, and I'm not sure where it went after that.
Yeah, I think actually where this was left was I was supposed to do something about this, which hasn't happened. So the problem is there are error states that aren't exposed or aren't supposed to be exposed, where sort of micro states are hidden in them, and so it's confusing to users because if you're in error, so this happens for several states, but if you're in error managing, it's actually displayed if you do a show on that volume as being an error, which is fine. And if you list all your volumes, those will show up in error state. But if you try to filter by the ones that are in error, some will be missing because the database is looking for error only, and it's not paying attention to error managing.
The other part that I'm remembering from this before is that I'm pretty sure, at least I had come to the conclusion that one of these states shouldn't even be a state that we use, and we need to clean that up a little bit. But I'll have to go dig through some stuff to find the details on that.
Yeah, I guess what's really happening here is this dude's getting very frustrated that his patch is sitting. So let me try to do something helpful on the patch, and I guess.
So the part that I'd wanted to look into on this was we've done some weird things with statuses as a way to communicate failures instead of using the async messages API. And the result of that is weird things like a status called error managing deleting, which is just, I don't even know what that's supposed to mean. So I don't know how relevant it is to the narrow scope of the actual bug that this patch was trying to fix, but I think we do need to pass through there and figure out if there are statuses or states that we can just stop using, because some of them I think are just making a mess of things.
Yeah, I think it's it's like Nova has, right, they've got the status of a VM, but they also have a task state. And I think that's what these were sort of trying to get away without introducing the task state. They were just introducing states that aren't.
We overloaded the status field, and then we got weird bugs like this because we made it all complicated and hard to reason about.
Yeah, because the thing was, we're using the status field. There's a specific enumeration that are supposed to be user visible, and then there are the internal ones that we're supposed to manage properly. And there's been leakage, is what's happened, because we have multiple people working on all this stuff at different times, and they, yeah. All right, so I guess the main thing I need to do here is just review this specifically for this bug only, because I wanted the guy to go back and fix everything, which is probably, we should fix this first, as Eric just said, and then continue. Okay.
But I agree with Eric's idea of figuring out which states we can remove and just create error messages, user messages for those cases. For example, probably the error managing can probably be something that we can work around or something.
Yeah, I think the problem is we use them internally to make decisions.
One of them actually overlapped with some of the discussions around, I think at least one of these states is supposed to indicate don't count this in quota, is why it was there.
And I have a patch that is failing functional test and something I have to fix it, but it's adding use quota field to volumes and a snapshot. So if we have a status that we are using for that, we can replace it with this field.
Any general comments or observations? Okay, next one.
I did a quick look right now at the patch, and I'm not sure I'm convinced by where they are doing the changes, but I will try to review the patch and confirm.
Okay. Thanks. Okay, and then support revert any snapshot due to the volume, which we've discussed the last couple of cycles.
Well, it's an interesting feature. Looking at the spec, I will just say the same thing I think I've said a few times about this, which is that if we're going to do this, we really have to put some thought into how a user is going to be able to look at the snapshot chain and tell what's going on when it turns into a tree instead of a chain. Because currently it's linear, and this will make it non-linear. And maybe that doesn't matter most of the time, but it's a fairly significant paradigm shift just in kind of usability of how snapshots work. And I don't think the spec has thought through what we need to do about that and how it's going to actually end up working for people.
Yeah, and I remember, I think Gorka had made some suggestions about how this would be done in a generic way.
Yeah, but it's the implementation. It doesn't. Yeah, it's. But I don't think you. Well, you basically just write data on top, which is not nice, not efficient, and it's kind of bad because you're basically you either attach the original snapshot if the driver supports it, or you clone the snapshot and then you copy data to your current point in time. You get the effect of revert without the actual benefits that most drivers can get from revert, which is doing it fast.
Well, I think part of discussing this before too was that we were hoping to get some idea of how many drivers can do this efficiently, and I think we still don't have that.
I think that's a really good point. I mean, yeah, a lot of the more modern drivers and modern backends can do this, but we do have the issue of lowest common denominator that we have to deal with.
Fortunately, for the lowest common denominator can do the generic way I described is terribly slow, but it gets at as the common, like every driver can support this, doing it this way, and newer storage can actually be efficient.
Well, and just to frame this from the end user point of view, because I don't think the spec covers all this. If you can do this for a user, even if it's slow, it can be a really useful thing because they don't end up getting billed for cloning volumes when they don't actually want to clone volumes. So for certain users, even if it's really slow, they still want it. And that makes sense because if they can continue just using one volume rather than having to clone to a new volume, which has billing implications. It also has implications about your volume IDs change, and if anything's tied to that, you have to go change that. And there are end user reasons that this is a really handy thing to do, regardless of the performance of it.
I mean, if we don't want to do it for the lowest common denominator, is there not a way of having a capability that if modern storage arrays can do this really, really, really easily, then they say, yeah, we have that capability, and we just do it when you request it. And if the driver doesn't have that capability, it returns a can't do this.
Yep, sounds good. And going back, Simon, probably you can tell us, is there, for example, in these modern arrays, is there a problem with now instead of having your snapshot being a sequence, suddenly you have a tree because you revert to a point that it's earlier, and now you create a different snapshot?
Yeah, it doesn't. I know from our perspective, we don't care. You don't need to worry about any of that at all. You can take any snapshot, recover it, not have to delete anything. You can take a middle one and end one, makes no difference, and you can still then keep taking snapshots. It makes no difference to us. And we just overwrite it. We won't even go for that middle cloning and recover. We just do it a complete overwrite just of the parent. But again, we do it in a because we're an all-flash array and the way we use our metadata, it's incredibly easy for us. And it would be interesting to know which vendors would be able to do that sort of capability. Because if it's a few, only a few, then maybe it's a special capability. If it's most of them, then that's a different way of looking at it, and we have to maybe flip it the other way around. And the standard way is to do that. And then other drivers who can't do it have a non-capability effectively.
Is there actually anybody who is going to try to be working on this soon?
I think the patch was updated kind of recently, so I think Zwan is still interested in doing it, although I'm not saying his name correctly.
Yeah, I think we need to make sure that the spec is appropriate before we start doing any more work on it. I'm happy to work on the spec. My coding isn't good enough to actually do the code.
Well, it would be really helpful to get your comments on the spec, so that's good.
Yeah.
All right, so. Okay, any other comments or anything about that? All right, and then the next one is, oh, I should probably stop the recording. Yeah, let's take a timeout. We're doing okay time-wise. So it's 11:01, or I mean 15:01. Let's pick up again at 15:15. How does that sound to people? I will just declare.
Sounds good.
We'll pick up again at 15:15. Thank you.
Thanks.